Sutliffian Report. Today, we have an incredible guest to join us, Allyson Taylor, and we're going to be talking about Sharia Finance and a number of things. We have the news that's coming up. We're going to be talking about COVID-19 and how it's affecting the Islamic world, and are they all pulling their hair out at this point? Wait till you hear the answers on that. And then we'll get to the news on terrorism and Islamization around the world. We have a lot in store for you. Again, this is the show where the truth is never hidden, and this is the show where you will always find the news and you will always find the truth. And I want to say thank you, and I want to welcome on Allyson Taylor. Thank you for joining us, Allyson Taylor.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a joy to have you. I enjoyed our conversation immensely yesterday. I want to say thank you for that time. I was kind of blown away about the background of what got you into doing research on Sharia Finance. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about. I know you wanted to share it a little bit more in the stories ahead, more in the questions I have ahead, but would you could tell us a little bit about that background?
Okay, I was just an interior designer, a mom, getting my kids ready to go to school on 9/11 when I turned on the television, as I always did, to get them ready, and I saw the second plane go into the building, and from that moment on, my life changed. We had just come back from Israel. My oldest son had decided they wanted to become more religious, and I ended up taking him to a modern Orthodox school where I met a mother, and the two of us were discussing what was happening and how, the Jews were being blamed for 9/11. This was happening. Anyway, I got involved with an organization called Stand With Us. I was one of the co-founders of that organization when they first started. And what we were doing was working on radical Islamic teachings that were going on the college campuses. So from being an interior designer, I was suddenly thrown onto one of my favorite campuses, which was UC Irvine, and witnessing what was going on not only in the classrooms but on the campus. And through that, I started doing my own personal investigation on an organization called the International Solidarity Movement, which was started by a gentleman named Adam Shapiro and his wife, Huwada Arif, who says she's a Palestinian. Well, what they were doing at the time was actually doing a lot of fundraising on the campus against the, quote, racist apartheid regime of Israel. But what they were actually doing was raising money to filter to the Holy Land Foundation based out of Texas, which then directly started to fund Hamas in their attacks during the Second Intifada against Israel. So instead of doing online shopping, I started doing research going from website to website, and that would lead me to websites that were actively breaking down the cost of suicide vests through different organizations, from the shrapnel to the actual cost of the vest. And I hooked up with a gentleman named Steve Emerson from the Investigative Project, and we started, sharing information together. From that, I started to work for the American Jewish Congress, and in doing that, I had received on my doorstep, after the attack at the El Al airport where 3 people were killed, 2 of them actually from my neighborhood, somebody dropped off a VHS tape, so this tells you how far back it goes, of the Orange County Islamic Center with the imam speaking about Sharia and jihad in both English and Arabic, and how important it was that every Muslim, regardless of being, quote, an American, your obligation towards your religious faith is towards Sharia and Islam. So with that, I started doing research into the Quran and the Hadith, and met people like Nani Darwish, and I have just blanked out one of the names. And when I got this tape, the tape also showed the execution of Daniel Pearl, and then it showed the celebration of the attacks on Bus 21 in Jerusalem with the Palestinians handing out candy to the children celebrating it. So I contacted the FBI and I said, I have a tape you should look at because technically the FBI is not allowed into places of worship to do their investigation. It took me a year. I called them every single day for a year, asking them to come pick up the tape from me because at that time we were still screening things for anthrax, and I was just worried the tape would get lost in a pile of stuff that they hadn't yet screened. So finally, a gentleman named Steve Young called me up from the FBI and told me that he would meet me. At that time I was working in Santa Monica for the American Jewish Congress, and we met, and I handed him a copy of the tape, and he started asking me if I knew anything about the Islamic Solidarity movement, just by coincidence. So I excused myself, went back to my office, picked up a file that I had that was probably about 4 inches thick, brought it back to them, and they asked me if I would start educating some of the counterterrorism agents that were being pulled from the gang resources to now work counterterrorism in Los Angeles. So I came home and I thought, well, the good news is that they're asking me about counterterrorism, but the bad news is that they're asking me about counterterrorism because at that time I didn't feel myself really being a counterterrorism expert other than just a concerned citizen and worried about the United States. So in our conversations that we had while I was educating them to what was going on the college campuses and how they were diverting funds into what they call zakat, which means it's like paying tithes. Every Muslim is required to pay 2.5% of their income to charity, but the charities are usually funded under the aegis of being humanitarian charities and get filtered through our system, basically laundered as that without us having any real knowledge of where the funds are going after that. A lot of 501c3s are set up. A lot of it's done through the madrasas or the religious schools that are set up. So in our conversation, they asked me if I was willing to become a mole and basically do the work that they couldn't do under the cover of being an FBI employee. So I said I would do it. I volunteered. I didn't get paid. All my expenses were paid. They were paid in cash in an envelope after I saved all my receipts. We would meet at P.F. Chang's because they had big booths and we could exchange our paperwork and not have people really overhear our conversation, so I had a code word as Chang. So whenever I called them up and I had information, that's what I used. I was read an admonishment every 6 months that said I was doing this on my own free will, that if I called and I was arrested, that they would say they didn't know me, that they would not do anything to help me. And I didn't tell my husband what I was doing because we had 2 young kids and I didn't want him to get scared. So I hired an attorney to basically know where I was because if I did get arrested or something happened to me, that somebody knew where I was. So this went on for about 3 years. I went to Amsterdam. I went to meetings at the Disraeli Center in London. I went to France. I was following the radical Islamic movement in places that the FBI didn't have jurisdiction. So I did that for 5 years until we decided that my face was getting too familiar at a lot of the places I was going, and I instead got a IP computer from the FBI with a hidden IP, created an avatar, and as ISIS was starting to form, I became a young, blonde, blue-eyed girl to try to entice a gentleman from ISIS to get information on their recruiting techniques. While doing this, I got involved through a good friend of mine because her husband was in the hedge fund business, and she was really concerned when she started looking at some of the funds, how people were doing a lot of investing in their portfolios, and they didn't know where their money was actually going and what it was going to. So she financed a grant through the Center for Security Policy to set up the first blog on Sharia Finance. And I got asked to do it. I am a person that has not balanced a checkbook or checked the balance in my account probably for the last 40 years. I always kind of had a more or less, I know what's in there kind of an attitude. But somehow the idea of the fact that we are financing and supporting institutions which are inherently anti-American, anti-Semitic, and anti-Christian horrified me. And I wanted to help do research on the specifics about what Sharia finance is, because it has creeped its way into the United States similarly to the Chinese virus. It's a form of economic terrorism similar to bioterrorism, and it's something that most people don't understand is going on right under our noses.
So what is Sharia finance? And I agree with you how it's come here to the United States. Very similar to a creepy virus.
Yes.
And
well, what it is?
Why should Americans be concerned about this?
Well, because they call it Islamic finance, which really conceals the Sharia basis. Now, if you understand the word Sharia, it's almost like Mein Kampf, my struggle, jihad, Sharia. The Sharia laws are the laws that you are to adhere to as a Muslim. And I'm not, again, I'm going to pre-qualify this and say not every Muslim follows a strict Sharia. A lot of them have become Christian or no longer are secular. But any Muslim who goes to a mosque and prays 5 times a day basically makes a commitment to spread the Sharia, the laws of Allah, throughout the world. And therefore, the euphemism of Islamic finance is really a silent Sharia. And with the help of the Western financial industry and the incorporation of the blockchain into our Sharia banking and finance, we're helping Sharia finance grow to over $2 billion in assets. But Wall Street and Fleet Street don't really acknowledge what's going on. The main purpose of Sharia-compliant finance is to promote the Sharia. It's Islamic doctrinal law, and it's regarded in the Islamic world as the words directly from Allah. So there is no, well, I'm into Sharia finance, but it really isn't anything that bad. Yes, it is. It is the implementation of laws that are stoning of women, hanging of homosexuals, beheadings, killing at all costs, kill and convert. It's a religious obligation for most Muslims to tithe their percentage, just like it is for Mormons. But when you're a Mormon, you're not directly funding your money towards, yes, there may be missionaries going out in the world, but if you don't convert, they're not going to kill you, or you're not a target for the Sharia.
There's a little bit of difference between the word tithe and the zakat that they're giving. A tithe represents the terminology for 10%, and
right.
zakat is only like 2.5%. So there's a little bit of difference there, and their big thing with Sharia finance is they don't want interest. That's
yeah, but that's really not true, because what they do is they restructure a mortgage or a loan so that technically the purchaser of the home becomes a renter. So, for instance, let me give you an example. Suppose you have $100,000 in cash and you want to buy a home and pay cash for the home. You rent the home to a tenant for $250 a month. At the end of a fiscal year, you've collected $250 times 12, or $3,000 in rent. That rent is a 3% return on your $100,000 investment, which is that 3% is what is called trade or bay. And then there's a 6% RIBA tax, which is rent, since it's based upon a business transaction. So it's not technically called interest. But what's more frightening is that this is being allowed under the laws of our SEC rules and the laws of really how we charge mortgages and rent. What they've done is they've reworded interest for rent, and they've basically rewritten the way you buy a mortgage. So they're actually changing our laws under the aegis of religion, theocracy, whatever, so that it fits the Islamic paradigm. Because technically Jews are not supposed to pay rent, but I mean interest. But I don't know of a Jew who doesn't go to a bank and get a mortgage and pay whatever the mortgage is at prime interest rate or whatever the interest rate is at the time. So this is a different way of calculating skirting around the rules of our normal SEC banking system.
So basically what they're doing, they're changing the concept of interest into fees. And it actually, I think it actually costs more the way they're talking about it, because you can reduce the amount of interest you pay by paying things off early, but you can't do that when you're on a fee-based cut. So this must make the banks very happy.
Right. So, for instance, if you're renting the home for 30 years, you are technically not supposed to alter anything in that home because you don't, quote, own it, because because you're renting it from the Sharia bank. So if you incur, let's say, upon a sale, losses on that home, both the tenant and the owner of the home incur the losses equally. What it does is the thing that's so scary about it is that if you think about people like the Boko Haram, Osama bin Laden, the Islamic State and caliphates in Iraq and Syria, they all do business under Sharia finance. So the fact that we are even allowing this into our system, it makes it really scary because Sharia finance is technically indistinguishable from Sharia itself, because you can't pick and choose if you want to be 100% Sharia compliant or 50% Sharia compliant. You're either compliant or you're not. So anybody that applies for a mortgage in one of our banks under the Islamic banking window, and many of the banks were opening up separate windows for Islamic people only, which is technically against the law in the United States. We don't have blacks only anymore, restaurants or bathrooms. But why were there rooms that we didn't know about where only Muslims can go in to do this type of financing? So it's very insidious because it's done without us even being aware of it happening. HSBC, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, I can't even, the list of banks that are working directly with Sharia finance are so frightening that in our own way, we are actually enabling the takeover of our banking system and our business model in the long run based on the demographics of the Muslim population over the years in the United States, in addition to people like the squad that we have with 4 known Muslims, including Keith Allison, that are on the intelligence committee, that are in the House, where they can start to change the laws based on the theories of the left and diversity and inclusivity to making it easier to be a Muslim in American society. So what we have to be very aware of this, what we call silent Sharia.
That's a big, huge point. I'm really thankful that you've been very clear. One of the things I want to point out, people, is that on this blog, I'm going to ask it to share the address of it in a minute, is if you want to go find out if your bank is on this list, where she's got there's an incredible list on this blog of banks that use Sharia compliant financing. It is shockingly long.
Yes, it is.
So can you tell the link to that site?
It's the ShariaFinanceBlog.com. Hold on. It is, if you just, you can Google, there's more than one, Shariah Finance Watch.com. They give a listing of every bank. And the thing that's really scary is there's no fewer than what we found out at the time that I was working with the Center for Security Policy, that there were 27 Muslim charities that were actually designated as funding terrorism by the U.S. Treasury Department and the UK Charity Commission. And this presents a real hazard to U.S. national security. So it's not only just the fact that we may be funding something we don't like. The effect of legitimizing and promoting Sharia in the West can be seen what's happening in Western Europe. It encapsulates Muslim society, where you have areas like in Britain, where there are Sharia-compliant areas or, quote, no-go zones, where to get a divorce, you go to a Sharia court. If you beat your wife, you can't be tried in a British court because the Brits have allowed the Sharia courts to rule over certain jurisdictions of that law. And we have to be very afraid. I mean, this is probably happening in our own communities, I'm sure. Dearborn, Michigan, and that there's a lot of areas in Michigan that a non-Muslim person doesn't go into anymore. It's like going into a foreign country. Look, I live in L.A., and there's a lot of areas with Hispanics where the signs, or Koreans, where the signs are all in Spanish, Korean. But I know that they are abiding, in most part, just like anybody else, the laws of the U.S. land. But when I see an Islamic enclave where everything is in Arabic, I know that at that point it's their. I beg your pardon? Hello? I lost you. Hi, I lost you. I'm sorry.
I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, I got dropped. The joy of live radio. Okay, sorry, I don't know what happened. I got like a big, huge scream type thing in my phone, and all of a sudden, everything went dead. Sorry about that.
Do you have me?
I called in, so I can hear you. Yes.
Okay.
So they can hear you now. Thank you. Thank you for calling back in.
Okay. All right. So where do we leave off?
With the zinger in my ear, I kind of lost track, unfortunately. We were talking about how charities, Islamic charities, are going using Sharia finance to finance terrorism.
Yes, what they're doing is they're formulating, let's say, like the International Solidarity Movement, even the Council for American Islamic Relations, MPAC, ISNA. These are all organizations which, like Keith Ellison, Farrakhan, Rashida Tlaib, Omar Ilan, they are all members of these organizations. These are actually front groups for the Muslim Brotherhood. But basically, the Muslim Brotherhood was given a pass under the Obama administration and kind of like opened up the doors for us to allow this type of charity raising in the United States because it was considered, quote, racist, or we were not being culturally tolerant by allowing these charities, which are supposed to help the poor children in Palestine, in Egypt, in Syria, Afghanistan. So when charities, what they are doing is funneling money in, and that money under their designation of being a nonprofit we don't have a real way of knowing where it's going. Now, the Holy Land Foundation actually went to court and lost and was shut down because the investigative project had presented to the House Security Council about the fact that this was going on with evidence, and after many years of fighting, in fact, it actually started under Bill Clinton during the first World Trade Center bombing. They were presenting this evidence. They finally got shut down, but it doesn't matter. When they get shut down, another one comes up. For instance, the madrasas, which are the nonprofit schools of teaching Islam, have no jurisdiction in any of our states for compliance about teaching us their syllabus for the teaching of what their children are getting taught. The books are coming in from Saudi Arabia. The funds that go into the school to pay the teachers are non-disclosed. So we don't know if a Muslim kid is going, let's say, to an Islamic school in Falls Church, Virginia, which happens to have a huge amount of Hamas-type
agent. It's a huge Muslim brother. Falls Church in Herndon, Virginia, are a huge area for Muslim Brotherhood.
So what happens is you think you're paying tuition, but part of it goes to tuition, but nobody, the FBI, we cannot get access into the school to actually see where the funds are going. So it's very easy for the tuition, part of that tuition, 2.5% or whatever they decide they want to take, to go directly into, quote, charities in Palestine, in Gaza, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. So, the parents that are sending their children to these schools know exactly what's going on. But under the laws of protection in the U.S. and nonprofits and religious institutions, and they're considered religious schools, they cannot go in. Now, while I was undercover, I tried to go in. I actually recruited one of my friend's kids just, as a Jewish convert to Islam, and I wanted my son to go, to learn about the 5 pillars of Islam. I was thinking about converting because normally they welcome converts because this is how they spread the Sharia. It's convert or kill. But when it came to coming to a school, I wasn't allowed past the first room because the scrutiny that I was given before I was allowed to have, I had to have people back me up. I had people in the community that knew who I was. I asked to see what kind of, how is my son going to be learning? What is he going to be taught? Can I look at the classrooms? I wanted to see the maps on the wall, if they included the state of Israel or were they all Palestine. I was not allowed past the door. So we have these rising up. We have them in Culver City. I mean, they're all over. There's a mosque 10 minutes away from where I live where they have a school. But, I'm not allowed to go in there. This is surreptitiously, we are allowing the funding of countries and a theocracy that want to destroy us right in our own backyards.
Wow. And to think that's all happening here. And that's the thing. And the difficult, I'm surprised the amount of scrutiny that would go through, but I guess that makes sense. Can you tell us about how Muslims are affected by the presence of Sharia finance institutes here in the United States?
How are they affected in terms of
how are Muslims here affected by the presence of Sharia finance? Are they forced to become Sharia compliant, or?
No, Muslims technically have to be Sharia compliant. That's part of the tenets of being a Muslim, is that you have to observe the Sharia. That's like, if you're a Christian, you read the New Testament. If you're a Jew, you read the Torah and the first, the Old Testament.
But if there was no Sharia, if there was no Sharia finance here, would they be allowed to seek other means, or do they have to leave the? I mean, that's I guess what I'm getting. If we didn't have Sharia finance,
what happens is that because they started moving here, and they say there's only 7 million Muslims, we really don't have a census on how many there are. But they again got into the banks, especially the European banks like HSBC and all those banks that were doing a lot of work in Saudi Arabia and do a huge amount of business with the countries that are Sharia compliant. So they were adjusting in their Sharia rooms to adhere to the Sharia laws behind the backs of basically the American banking system. So what was being submitted may not necessarily be the contract that was written between the bank and the lender and the lendee. So in order, the Muslim population has always been in the United States, but it's grown rapidly. I would actually say it's actually increased since 9/11. I would think that it would have gone the other way, but the amount of converts has actually grown. So the funds, the hedges, the stocks, money is money. And, sometimes people are just willing to give a wink and a nod and just take the money and slip it into a mutual fund. And that mutual fund may be a mutual fund that is, dealing with companies that are directly involved with Iraq, Afghanistan, or, it used to be Iran. I mean, Iran is one of the biggest offenders. I mean, HSBC basically lost a lot of business in the United States and lost a big lawsuit. It's too much to get into, but eventually had to pull out of their Islamic banking in the United States because of their connections to the ties to terrorism.
Wow. And that should be enough for people to wake up. And if you're doing business with some of these banks, again, you want to check this blog, the Shariah Finance Watch.
Yeah. And also what you should do if you are interested is to check your mutual funds. Look at the individual, like I will talk to my stockbroker and I say, look, I don't want to invest in anybody that is divestment, BDS against Israel. I don't want to deal with anybody that deals directly with Iran. I don't want to be in those funds. I don't want to make money on the blood of my own people. So I really scrutinize the investments that I go into to make sure that they are not Sharia compliant. And everybody has the ability to do this. You just have to be aware. I mean, you can go to the Bank of America. I mean, they're probably on the list too. There's so many banks. And ask them if they do a Sharia compliant loan. I mean, you could go in just looking like yourself, and see what they say. I mean, put them at task. And thing that's also very frightening in Sharia compliancy is the American Jewish Congress. We were handling a case for an African-American couple who owned a kiosk in Reagan Airport. They had it for like 30 years. They were selling sausages, black-eyed peas, a typical wonderful, I would say, an African-American traditional style menu. And because of the amount of Muslims that were coming into the airport, they were complaining that the smell was offensive and it was offensive for them to have pork. So when their lease was up, the landlord wanted them to only sell, because they were getting complaints from Muslims, that they could only sell sausages made out of turkey or chicken, not pork. So in order to sign their lease, they agreed to this. They started selling their menu based on that type of a diet, and their business dropped, and they eventually went out of business. So they contacted us, the American Jewish Congress, to see if there was anything that we could do, and we tried to lobby for them, saying this was, this is not America. You can't dictate to a restaurant in a public space like an airport what kind of food you can serve. But they eventually couldn't fight the lawsuit anymore, and at the time that we were working with them, the Bernie Madoff thing happened, and our office closed. So unfortunately, it's happening more than you think. In Dallas, Texas, there's schools, near where Dell is. Dell Computer has a majority of a Somalian community that assembles the computers there, and they were taking 5 times a day a break at 15 minutes a time to do their prayers, because there's you have to commit to doing prayers 5 times a day. Now, the other workers that were non-Muslims started complaining about it because they were only getting 2 15-minute breaks per 4 hours, and they didn't understand why the Muslims get more break time than them. So Dell had to comply. Well, Dell asked the Muslims if they could do their first prayer at home and the second prayer after they left work. And there was a lot of backlash. So in order to get them to comply, they agreed to put foot baths in the bathrooms and a separate room for them to pray, so they didn't have to pray in the rooms where the Christians or the Jews were. So, I mean, this is happening at Dell Computer in Texas. These are the things that you don't hear about on the news that are going on. The school system in Dallas had a school population of about 3,000 children. 7 Muslim families came to the school, and the school was forced to stop serving like bologna, Jell-O, anything that was considered haram, which is like, or non-kosher, but haram. So the school system had to get halal meats, which cost like twice the amount of money as other meats to satisfy the needs of 7 children versus the other 2,093 students, where, most kids, if they're Jewish and kosher, they'll bring their own food. They're not asking the school to supply them with kosher food. This is also happening greatly in our jail system. A lot of conversion is going on, and a lot of radical Islamic conversion is going on inside the jails. And the jail system is now being forced to supply halal meals for the new converts, which are usually better quality food than the other inmates get. So what what you are getting is you are breeding a radical Islamic population in our jails. So when they get out, you not only, I mean, I don't want to make this as a blanket statement, but when you get out, let's say you have been a thief or you've done assault, you get out, you're now Sharia compliant, you're being told by your mosque that it's okay to hit your wife, that it's okay to spit on a woman who doesn't, you know, whose arms are uncovered or has too much makeup on or isn't wearing a hijab. So you have a already population that's not actually getting, you know, a good training within the prison system to come out and become a better American, but they're becoming radicalized Muslims.
That is something we've been talking about. I haven't brought in the prison aspect of this lately, but that is something we're going to be talking about a lot. We've had Patrick Dunleavy on, and he brings this topic up of what the dangers of what he considers radical Islam. My honest belief is that there really is no such thing as radical. It's devout. You're either devout or you're not. Just
correct.
like
you're correct.
And that's I think that's where we get really close. I don't like the term radical because my simple reasoning is that radical is something outside the norm, and in Islam, Sharia compliance is the norm.
You're right.
And so this is one of my reasons I try to stay away from the term radical. I think Stephen Coughlin's work on this topic is outstanding, where he actually examined anything he could. He was looking for something that would stand out and not be the norm with people who are considered extremist or radical, and he couldn't find any speech that was considered outside the norm. So that's where I'll fight. I don't like. That's where I don't like that term. I think devout probably fits it, and you agree with me.
Yes, I do.
I'm just amazed with all this stuff.
I have to give kudos to named Salim Mansour, who is a Canadian, who is a professor at the University of Ontario. He's a writer as well. He is a practicing Muslim, but he is one. I have to say, doesn't go to the mosque anymore to pray. Prays at home, and feels that he can't go because the mosque. He basically is like a reformed Muslim. I mean, it's very, but he doesn't follow the tenets of the Sharia. He just, look, it's a very complicated issue. And you're right. Saying radical Islam is actually falling into the trap that Obama set up by us not being able to say certain things. But that's doublespeak in the Orwellian nature of what's happening in our society.
Yes, it is. Thank you for recognizing that. Wow. So I want to ask, you've been sharing an incredible wealth of knowledge with us. My show is not just about naming the problem, but how do we solve the problem? So what suggestions do you have for us to limit or stop Sharia finance here? Do you have any suggestions?
Yes, I think we have to write to our Congress. We have to, I'm going to say it. I think we have to vote Trump and hope that he wins in 2020, because I really believe that that Mike Pompeo and that the people who are working in the administration understand this, where we had a lot of people who turned a blind eye. I think we have to not be afraid to speak about it. Just, it's hard to walk around with a MAGA cap, but think how hard it is to talk about radical or Islam being a threat to the democracy and the Republic of the United States. I mean, look what happened to Turkey. I mean, the Ottomans stopped the caliphate from coming in, but now they've opened the gates. Look what happened to Germany. Look what's happened to France. Look what's happened to Britain. I mean, look, this bioterrorism that we have coming from China is just as insidious. But what's more, we've got a society that's willing to comply with us being on a lockdown right now because we don't want to get sick. But if we present Islam and what the tenets of the Sharia are as a sickness, maybe we can get people to start to listen. It takes, all you have to do is take one person, and really writing letters, calling your congressman, having bills presented, being aware of what's going on, complaining if a school is asking you to allow halal meats. Don't be afraid to be the person that speaks up. I personally don't care if somebody doesn't like me. I'm over the feelings part of my life. I'm more into the actions. So I think we have to question and be aware. I may not live to see the outcome of this because they have a 1,000-year plan. And if we allow ourselves to be what they call dhimmis and live under the restriction of being allowed to say the things we say, look, during the 15th century when Jews and Muslims were living together in Spain, the Jews had to walk on the sidewalk walk into the street if a Muslim was walking on the sidewalk. So we had to pay a jizya tax in order to be able to live. Slowly, if we let this happen, we are going to lose what we have in many ways. Right now I know we've got the election coming up, and that's really primary number one on everybody's agenda. But I think if you could put Sharia as part 2 of what your agenda is for the future, you have to be very aware. Being energy independent is tantamount to us not funding the people that want to kill us. It's imperative that we keep ourselves energy independent. I resented going to the gas station and filling it with gas knowing that I was paying the people who want to kill me. It's a weird thing.
I think it's amazing what we're coming up to is yes, we have to. The only way we can fight back is a lot of times with knowledge and then taking that chance and saying no. I think that's a lot of it.
Yeah, we are at the crossroads of fighting good versus evil in everything. We are in biblical times right now. And I'm not an extremely religious person, but we're at one of those times that will be, if there's a population in the next 300 years, they will be reading about what we are going through right now. We want to win. We have to have good win over evil. This is a time for us to dig deep into our hearts. And instead of being lazy and thinking that somebody else is going to take care of it, and somebody else is going to write that letter, and somebody else is going to do it, we have to speak up and do it. We can no longer be dhimmis. We have to be the warriors. We have to fight for what we believe, and that's the only thing I can really say.
Thank you very much. Allyson, please tell people, are you writing still online? I didn't ask that earlier. Are you still sharing articles?
No, I stopped writing in order to go back to trying to earn a living, which right now seems a little bit impossible. So I am willing, I am more than happy, though, to speak it, for people. I could do it on Skype. I'll speak at churches, temples, private coffee clatches, whatever. Because I really believe that sharing what we know with the people that are interested in hearing it will help us survive as a republic and as a free people and a Judeo-Christian society. I really so want my children to grow up in the world that I thought we would have as adults, and I see people really trying to take it from us. I'm not willing to go down without fighting. So
that's how we have to be. We can't live any other ways. That's my.
No. We are in a battle for survival.
Yes. Allyson, I want to say thank you for joining us. You're a wealth of knowledge, and if you're on, so if people, if you're looking for someone on the West Coast and you're on Facebook, look for Allyson Taylor on Facebook. She again, you've listened to her, you've heard her. She's a wealth of knowledge. She's willing to share. Synagogues, churches, conservatives, anybody who wants to know the truth on Sharia finance, contact her. Invite her to come speak to your group. It's important that we get people informed. I want to say thank you for joining us, and we'll have to have you back sometime soon in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, and God bless you all.
God bless. Bye. Oh, wow. Amazing. Sometimes